Welcome back to our discussion with Dr. Jim Coakley from Moody Theological Seminary. Dr. Coakley, we have talked about the patriarchs. Now let's spend a little time on the matriarchs. Yes. There is something disturbing going on there. We know that God is sovereign over the womb, and yet the matriarchs that we've seen, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, struggled with infertility. Yeah. Is there significance to that? I'm sure God had purpose in it.
Right. Well, what I like to think about is how does that fit within the theme of Genesis? We're told in Genesis 3:15 that there's going to be conflict between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Mm-hmm. So I see this as part of the development of that theme throughout the book of Genesis. We all are expecting for the seed of the woman to be there to, again, make things right. And what we have is tension, conflict, and tension is what makes any good narrative continue on. And so we, the reader, are kind of saying, well, is the seed of the woman going to come? Well, barrenness, infertility. So there's struggles there. So I think it just kind of adds to the tension level of that theme all the way through Genesis. And of course, once we get beyond Genesis, that's really not a major issue. Hannah it is, but there's not major issues with fertility the rest of the way. But early on that is, because it's stressing that theme of the seed of the woman. But it is interesting. I know for a lot of viewers, they struggle perhaps with the issue of infertility.
Painful issue.
Painful, very painful. And that's one of the most agonizing things for a married couple to deal with. And I do find a little bit of solace, not much, a little bit of solace in looking at the barrenness issues in the book of Genesis, where we have Abraham. And it's kind of really a sad picture when we talked last time about first impressions. The first thing we read about Sarah is that she was barren, and as if to twist the knife just a little bit more, she has no children. I mean, already barren already means no children.
Right.
And so the author, Moses, is making it very painfully obvious that Sarah is without child. And of course, in that culture, that was your social security. That was what you put all of your hope in the future based on your offspring. And for Sarah to be barren, that was a huge, huge point of tension, I'm sure. But what's happened is we see Sarah was barren. As you notice, we see Rebecca was barren, and we see Rachel was barren, all the major matriarchs. But what's interesting is how does that barrenness get resolved? With Sarah, God just opened her womb. So God did it all on his own. With Rebecca, it's interesting, Isaac is said in the text to have prayed for her. So it was her husband that prayed, and God answered his request, and she became fertile. With Rachel, it's not her husband, Jacob, praying, it's she herself praying. So not that there's a magic bullet to solve the issue of infertility, but notice we have God doing it, God opening Sarah's womb. We also have the difference with Rebecca where Isaac prayed for her, and God answered Isaac's prayers, and then also Rachel prayed for herself, and God answered her prayers. So there's not one solution that's going to work. God uses a multiple variety of means to deal with the tension in the book of Genesis. And so I would, again, caution readers, listeners to understand that there's not one way that you're going to get God to do this.
Right.
But God uses a variety of means sometimes to deal with this issue, and especially as it pertains to the book of Genesis. That's such a key issue, the seed of the woman theme. But I know how agonizing that it is, and my heart goes out to any viewer, any family that's dealing with the issue of fertility, because I know that's a painful one.
Yeah. One thing that we have seen clearly in our study of the book of Genesis is that we're going to go back to the patriarchs. Some of them are rascals.
Yes.
And they're saints, but they do not always behave like saints. In fact, sometimes their actions are just downright despicable or reprehensible. Can you talk about that and discuss that a little bit about why do we have this picture of them in the fullness of their humanity?
Right. We get to see these characters, warts and all. Right from the start, Adam, we see him as a passive individual who doesn't seem to want to take the lead. So right away, the first main character is seen to have some faults. Noah, again, righteous guy, but at the end of his life, there's that sad situation that occurs with his son Ham and Canaan. But then we get to Abraham. Abraham's life is a journey of faith, but also acts of expedience, where he takes things into his own hand. We're not getting into the reprehensible acts yet, but we soon do, because in Abraham's life, what we see is how he and Sarah treat Hagar, which is really, really bad, if you want to look at it. They abuse her. They just manhandle her and send her off into the wilderness. Abandon her. But part of it is, as reprehensible as that was, there's also you reap what you sow. And it's interesting, when we look at Abraham and Sarah and the abuse that they give towards an Egyptian Hagar, well, what happens in the next book of the Bible, Exodus? We see payback in that now the nation of Egypt, which Hagar is from, is now part of the disciplining process to winnow out the chaff, as it were, from the nation of Israel's life.
So what had started out as a personal issue expands to a national.
You reap what you sow on a huge scale. We have Simeon and Levi, who do despicable acts to the Shechemites. While Simeon and Levi use the sign of the covenant, circumcision, as a means to kill a unsuspecting city. Now, they were pagan, they were not normal, righteous people, but still what they did was cruel. In fact, even what Jacob in the blessing says about Simeon and Levi, they hamstrung oxen. Which of course just incapacitates animals for no reason. It's just
mean.
It's just mean.
Yeah.
So the Bible does not whitewash the actions of these characters. Judah and Tamar, again, we see how bad Judah becomes. And so really the main point that I think we have to recognize is that we should not lift these Bible characters up so high on a pedestal that we emulate all that they do, because really the hero of the story of the book of Genesis is God himself. And so what he does is that in spite of these characters' actions, even reprehensible ones, God is still able to fulfill his promise, his covenant to this people, even though they don't deserve it, because of his grace and because he sovereignly had chosen to use these people. And and again, that's a good reminder for us today. God is not going to be thwarted in his plan and program by our actions, whether they be good or evil. God desires to have faithful children obediently follow him. But he's not also going to be wringing his hands wondering, what can I do now because my people are so bad? God can still orchestrate his plan and program out, even through very flawed characters.
Yeah. One of the things that we've seen and said several times in our studies, we've gone through previous books other than Genesis, is that just because something in the Bible is described for us doesn't mean it's prescribed for us. That these people acted in such a manner, therefore go and do likewise. And I do appreciate that God uses very flawed people, because that's hope for me.
That's right.
That's hope for our viewers and for you, that we don't have to be perfect, flawless vessels. And I think of that our weakness demonstrates his strength, because clearly the covenant promises did not happen because of the actions of the patriarchs. They didn't bring them about by their own righteousness, but you see God's grace magnified in their life despite some of their actions.
And that's one of the beauties about the Bible, the Word of God, because whenever you read ancient literature about kings especially, they can do no wrong. Assyrian kings, everything they did was grand and glorious. We read the faults of our characters, our patriarchs, right there in living color, right in the text. So we're not trying to whitewash them. So, like you say, we don't emulate these characters in all their actions. Abraham lied and got a lot of goods out of it. So is the moral of the story, tell a lie and increase your bank account? We would never say that. So we have to realize that narratives show rather than tell. They describe rather than prescribe, as you said, and that's a good reminder. Narratives are different than epistles. When we read Paul's letters, he clearly says, do this and do that. Do not be conformed to this world. We know what that means. But when we read stories, we don't have that kind of preaching. We have to then read what is the moral, what is the theme and the theological purpose of why these accounts are included within the story of Genesis. And oftentimes they're about portraying God as the one who's in control of even flawed humans.
Okay. In taking a look at the big picture of the book of Genesis, we see a quarter of the book of Genesis is spent with dealing with Joseph, except for one chapter
Yeah.
within that. And you wonder, why does Joseph get so much ink spilled on him when he's not even in the seed line of the
Right.
Messiah?
Right.
How do we explain him getting a quarter of the book of
Right.
Genesis?
Yeah, I mean, technically, he's not even, quote, one of the patriarchs. I mean, he's listed on the same book as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he's not one of the patriarchs. And I think that's something that we, as like you say, as a big picture, have to kind of look at. Why do we have the last 14 chapters on an individual by the name of Joseph when he is not the one that we're tracking in terms of the seed of the woman? If anything, when we talked about earlier about character, you would think Joseph would deserve to get the seed line just based off of some of his actions in the story. But yet it's Judah. And you say, why is it Judah rather than Joseph? Joseph deserves it.
He's an
God,
upstanding
come
guy.
on, right?
Yeah.
He's a moral guy in many ways, and yet why is it not Joseph? Why is it Judah? Well, and we also, as you said, there's one interruption, chapter 38. And so it's interesting. Joseph is introduced in Genesis 37, and we're introduced to his brattiness, really, and telling on his brothers. And then we follow up kind of what is many people say is an interruption. Why do we interrupt the story of Joseph with this sordid account of Judah and Tamar?
Are you going to tell us?
I'm going to tell you why. It's soap opera-like in some ways.
It is.
Again, these characters of these accounts do some very despicable things. But one of the things I think Moses is doing is setting up the two primary characters that we need to follow the rest of the way. Joseph and then Judah. And that's why it's interesting when you read about Judah, every time he speaks, people listen to him. He's the one who says, hey, let's not kill him, let's sell him.
Right.
And they sell Joseph rather than kill him. He even is able to convince father Jacob to send Benjamin down. So Jacob is one who's even listens to Judah. When, of course, Jacob really does not have a lot of good qualities either in many ways. But when Judah speaks, everybody listens. When Reuben speaks, nobody listens. It's kind of a sad character. So why we have, I think then the focal point is that Moses is introducing chapter 37, Joseph, trace him. But he's also reminding us, chapter 38, also keep your eye on the ball by tracing Judah. And what's interesting is we see this sordid account with Judah in chapter 38. And what's happening is that we see his transformation. Judah, after he is confronted about his sin, does something that we very rarely see in Genesis. That is, he owns up to his sin. A lot of patriarchs never confess that they are the guilty ones.
Yeah, you don't see that with Jacob at all?
No. With Judah, when he's confronted, he says, she is righteous, not I. He owns up to his sin. And I think what we see from there on out, just like Jacob in the wrestling scene, that's Judah's transformation. And we can see now the transformation to where Judah is now the one to whom even dad listens to. Because what I find very interesting is that Rachel was Jacob's beloved wife. But when he dies, who does he ask to be buried next to? He has to be buried next to Leah, who is Judah's mom, not to Rachel, who is, of course, his beloved wife. So I think that there is something going on there where we are to trace and follow Judah, who is the seed line, rather than Joseph, who is great for the preservation of Israel, but not necessarily for the spiritual transformation. If it wasn't for Judah, there would really be no spiritual transformation. Joseph preserved the life of the nation, which is very important. But Judah is the one that, in a sense, was the role model, because he is the kingly tribe. And notice then, too, the rest of the way through Israel's history, who is the primary tribe in the southern kingdom that keeps the flame? It's Judah. Who is the one that leads the north? It's Ephraim. Ephraim is Norm, and that's one of Joseph's sons. So what I think is we're tracing the two major tribes is the tribe of Joseph through Ephraim in the northern kingdom, and the tribe of Judah, which is the southern kingdom. And so we're saying, watch the trajectory. But notice, Joseph is a little more secular, because even Joseph, if you look at what he does, and even in the book of Genesis, he is able to preserve Egypt, but it's really to make for the glory of Egypt, where Judah is the royal line, seed line, but it also is the one from whom the kings and the role model that we see. And Judah in chapter, I think it's chapter 44, when he is a lawyer-like figure before his brother, he does a masterful job. And not only does he admit sin like he did earlier, but he also says, I will take the place. He's willing to become a substitute for his brother Benjamin. And so we see the sacrificialness, we see his transformation, and we see that. And so watch Judah. Next time you read Genesis 37 to 50, instead of focusing on Joseph, look at Judah and look what happens and how he's viewed by Moses.